1984, Nintendo released Excitebike for the Famicom. And when the NES was released in North America in 1985, this game was already made and ready to go for launch. Let's pop it in the old NES and give it a try, shall we? You gotta love a racing game where the two button controls are fast and faster. And that's the case in Excitebike. There is no brake button. So in Excitebike you control the red and white colored racer. And you're in a motocross off-road type of setting where you race on 5 different tracks. You have the choice of racing by yourself against the clock or with other racers involved. But in the other racer mode, like you see here, you are truly racing against the clock. The other racers you do see while you're racing serve only as an obstacle for you to maneuver around or over. Nintendo differentiates these two modes by calling them Selection A and Selection B. And this mode that you're seeing now is Selection B. So quite obviously in Excitebike you use the D-pad to move your driver about, and you use A to accelerate and B to accelerate even faster. But when you accelerate faster with B, your temperature gauge also rises. And if your temperature gauge fills all the way up in red, then you have to pull over for a few seconds while your bike cools off. Now, Excitebike is a very early Nintendo title for the NES or Famicom, whichever system you have, depending on which continent you're on. And as such, you can tell that Nintendo is still kind of cutting their teeth in all aspects of the system platform. The graphics of Excitebike are nothing much to look at, but they are effective. They get the job done, and you can understand very easily what's going on visually. As far as sound goes in Excitebike, there's not a whole lot to work with. There's a jingle that plays when you win, and there's a few other sound effects. The crowd cheers after the race is over, and you have the obvious engine noises and a few other sounds the bike makes depending on what type of terrain you're on. And that's about it. But I think in a game like Excitebike, less is more. I think if they included a cheesy musical score behind you while you raced, would definitely take away from the game. Now, it should be noted that Excitebike is a one-player racing game. There is no two-player option. But if you have a Famicom with a Famicom Disk System peripheral, you can pick up Verse Excitebike, which was a sort of re-release of the game with a two-player versus mode. But that, of course, was only available in Japan. Now, Excitebike is a relatively short game with only 5 tracks, and it's relatively easy to master. But this game did have one very interesting, very unique feature, and that feature was a big draw to why people wanted to play this game or bought this game. This game was part of the Programmable Series, and I'll show you what that's all about. Now, if we select the Design mode and go down to Design and hit Start, we can program our own track. And that was a really cool feature in 1984, 1985. Now, this track design feature is very primitive by today's standards. There's only 19 options that you can place on the track. But this little feature is what made this game really cool. A lot of people talked about this game when it came out, and this is what they talked about with it. The only problem with the design mode is that in anywhere but Japan, you could not save your track designs. There is a save and load feature on the design course menu, but those are designed to work with the Famicom data recorder, which was a peripheral available only in Japan, and that was basically a cassette recorder that plugged into your Famicom. And you can basically save the data of your track on any standard audio cassette tape. But basically only 3 games had functionality with the Famicom data recorder, and they were Excitebike, Mach Rider, and Wrecking Crew. But unfortunately this device was never available outside of Japan. So every time you wanted to play a custom track, you had to actually sit down and program it on the spot and then sit and play it. If you turn the power off on your system, you'd lose the custom track data and have to start all over again. So the big question is, how does Excitebike hold up today? And to be quite honest, not that well. Other than for nostalgic purposes, I didn't have that much fun playing the game. And my biggest complaint with it was that there was no 2-player versus mode. That would have definitely changed my opinion about Excitebike. The one big draw of the game was the programmable mode, but 25 years later, it doesn't have that much of a draw. But the good news is that there are plenty of copies of Excitebike around, and you can get a copy fairly cheaply, for under $2, I'd say. If you want to pick it up for the Wii Virtual Console, that would cost you 500 Wii points, which is roughly equivalent to $5. But if you're playing this on the Wii, you do have the option of saving the custom tracks to your hard drive, which is definitely a nice feature. I'm Dommy from Classic Games Revisited. Until next time.